Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. And first we're going to start with the Kupyansk direction because we have interesting updates that we need to discuss. First we need to say a few words about Synkivka. The Russian sources confirms and the Ukrainians reported that as a result of counter-offensive, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the northern part of the village. So basically the Russians during the previous days made something like reconnaissance in combat or in force, and as a result of that attack the Russians managed to enter the northern outskirts of the village, but the Ukrainians counterattacked and the Russians took a decision to step back. But now the Russians understand a lot, they received a lot of information. They managed to understand where exactly the Ukrainians are hiding their armored vehicles, their fire positions, their minefields, and so on. Obviously, during the next few days, the Russians will make more attempts to attack not just in direction of the village, but obviously the Russians will try to improve their positions further in direction of the road, of this direction deep inside of the forest that located on the south of Liman Pervy and on the north of Kupyansk. And the main goal and the main purpose of the Russians will be to establish control over this territory, over this part of the forest, which will increase the, let's say, the area of control, and which will make Synkivka a little bit more encircled in comparison with the current configuration. So we'll see what is going to be next. Also, very interesting update is coming from the 14th Mechanized Brigade. If you remember, this is the core and the main brigade in this area, one of the brigades that is a core, and this brigade operates on the line between Orlyanka, Stepovo, Novoselovka, Petropavlovka, and basically this brigade is responsible for the clashes that took place in this area. They repelled a lot of Russian attacks on this direction, and today we got very interesting update from the Ukrainian sources. Let's take a look at this. This is the woman, and this is the something like she is the officer of psychology help or psychology service. She's a psychologist of the 14th Separate Mechanized Brigade. So what did happen? At some day during the previous few days of clashes in this area, the 14th Mechanized Brigade received an order to counterattack the Russian positions, obviously without support, without artillery support, without nothing, right? And the officer and the officer of this brigade refused to follow the order because he understood that that operation was a suicide operation. And this woman started telling very bad words about the officer. She started telling a lot of bad words about the soldiers on the ground, Ukrainian soldiers who refused to follow the order. She called them cowards and many other different words, and she tried to motivate them and to force to attack the Russian positions. And basically during that conversation, the officer of 14th Mechanized Brigade took a gun and basically shot her down. And that's it. So, and this is the story. But the most important thing from this piece of news is that this is another way, another reason, another purpose of the Ukrainian authorities how to use women on the ground. Not just the stormtroopers, not just the truck drivers, the sniper, and so on. Also, as you can see, the Ukrainian authorities try to use a beautiful woman among the man squads who is located on the front line and maybe haven't been seen women for many years and days during the combats and so on, and they try to use them as the main motivators or maybe as the power to force Ukrainian soldiers to fight. Very interesting approach from the Ukrainian side, but we see that at least on Kupyansk direction that approach didn't work. Another interesting update from Kupyansk itself is that Ukrainian military authorities took a decision to evacuate soldiers from the villages in this area, and to move them deep inside the forest that located in Kupyansk. And we're talking about the cities like Kucherevka, Podole, and Kurilovka. So this is Kurilovka, this is Podole, and this is Kucherevka. So all these soldiers from these areas were redeployed, let's say, in the forest. This forest, let's say, this forest, and this forest. And the main reason of that is the very heavy Russian bombardments on this area. And to reduce the losses, they took a decision to act like that. Furthermore, very interesting update is coming also somewhere from the Kupyansk direction. According to information we have, significant number of Kubanians are fighting on the Russian side. Maybe this is not from Kupyansk, maybe from Kherson, but like an entire battalion of Kubanians fighting on the territory, not just like a few, 2, 3 like volunteers, but battalions of soldiers of this nation. Another interesting update also is coming from Kupyansk direction, and we're going to talk about new FPV drone operator by the name of Udai. This is the Russian FPV drone operator, and he is becoming very famous and popular these days, and he is making his own calculation, and this is like not just calculation, he is making his own diary. He called this the diary of Udai. So he's not even diary but a calculator, but basically he's a maniac as I understand, but he's making some calculations regarding the Ukrainian losses. Every single day he published new video of FPV drone bombardments during the previous day, and according to his own calculations and estimations for the previous 14 days, as you can see there is a counter on the top. 200 means that this is the code of killed soldiers. 200, that means that soldier is killed. 300 means that soldier is wounded. So these basic calculations means that since the beginning of his diary, of his calculation, he managed to kill around 200, that means code 200. He managed to kill up to 59 Ukrainian soldiers, and according to his estimations he managed to wound up to 39 Ukrainian soldiers. So imagine yourself, just for 2 weeks of clashes, just 2 weeks of activity, this soldier, this maybe young FPV drone operator, managed to kill and wound, let's say managed to reduce the number of Ukrainian forces for around 98 soldiers. Imagine yourself the number of 98 just for 2 weeks. Maybe you can say that maybe it's very difficult to understand and realize this number, but I'll remind you that, for example, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 2 weeks, I calculated the numbers, during the previous 2 weeks, the Ukrainians lost 9,305 soldiers. So if we use the basic math and we will split one number on another, we're gonna see that this just one FPV drone operator during the previous 2 weeks managed to destroy or reduce the Ukrainian army for 1.5% of the total losses according to the Ministry of Defense. So basically just the raw estimation, raw calculation, raw mathematics, we can say that 100 FPV drone operators can achieve the same results as the same Russian army currently tried to achieve. Just 100. If every single FPV drone operator can, let's say, reduce and let's wound or kill Ukraine army according as this one, so there is no need to have significantly big army as Ukrainians are trying to do, because we know that now the Ukrainians are planning and trying to make mobilization process to involve young people, and the Russians from their side are trying not to use the quantity like side of military, let's say, achievements of military developments. The Russians are trying to increase the quality, not the quantity, and this is very important because, one more time, one soldier made 1% of losses of Ukrainian side according to the Ministry of Defense during the previous 2 weeks. So obviously the Russians will invest more in such a type of warfare, and obviously this will bring better results in comparison with the Ukrainians who try to involve in the combat young people. Now we are moving to Artyomovsk, Bakhmut direction. We got also a lot of updates from this territory. As you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area. There are no videos, just reports, some updates and so on. So according to information we have, as a result of clashes on this direction, the Russians managed to improve their positions a little bit in this area. So they're getting closer to Bogdanovka. Furthermore, the Russians made few attempts, few reconnaissance in force operation or reconnaissance in comp in direction of Bogdanovka, but all those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainian forces and the Russians were forced to step back. It doesn't mean that the Russians are going to stop. As we discussed, that was just reconnaissance and force operation, and the Ukrainians repelled that attack and the Russians returned back to their base position. Furthermore, the sources are saying that the Russians managed to improve their positions in this area, and as a result of clashes they also established control over this small part of the tree lines. Yet we haven't received geolocated confirmations, but if it's true, obviously we're going to receive them. The Ukrainians, as a result of clashes, understand that they can't control and they can't repel the Russians on the ground, let's say in the common situation. So that's why they took a decision to step back from the tree lines to the hills, and now the main area of concentration of Ukrainian forces is located in this area, and the Ukrainians are trying to hold this territory as long as possible. or maybe to prepare the defense belt before further clashes. The Russians from their side are trying to storm and to attack the first defense belt that goes along the living road 0506, the road that Ukrainians were using to support Bakhmut during the Bakhmut storm operation. So now the main clashes in this area are taking place exactly along these three lines. And obviously, as I understand today, we're going to receive some updates about the Russian progress in this area, and then the main clashes for the main hill is going to start. When talking about Klishchiivka, there are very heavy bombardments of this territory. The Russians continue bombing this territory. The Russians during the previous days made few attempts to enter Klishchiivka from the north, but the Russian attacks were repelled and they were forced to step back to the railways. The Ukrainians neither control this village, these areas in the green zone, and the main Ukrainian concentration of forces are located on the hills and on the forest that located on the northwest and on the west from Klishchiivka. So basically we are talking about this territory. This is the main concentration of Ukrainian forces, and this is the area that they're trying to hold as long as possible. The Russians from their side tried to attack this area from many directions, but the main important direction is this one. So this is the area of Russian attack. Now we are moving to Avdiivka area. We got also a lot of updates from this territory, and most of them are coming from the northern area. The Ukrainians during the previous days managed to counterattack a little bit and to restore some control over the positions on the south of the Terikon. Furthermore, the Russians, currently the main problem of the Russians is the facilities, these industrial facilities and Ukrainian underground facilities and so on. And currently the biggest pain in Russian, let's say, I don't want to continue this sentence, is this territory, this one. And now the Russians are trying to reduce to ruins this area. So what is this area? Let's take a look at the video. We're gonna understand everything. So there is a chemical plant. This is the Avdiivka chemical plant, and there is a tunnel. And the tunnel, well, this is the tunnel that Ukrainians can use to send armored vehicles, infantry, tanks, everything they want in the tunnel. And this is the entrance, and the entrance is located in Avdiivka itself, and they can leave the tunnel almost in the vicinity of the railways, and so that's why there is no problem for the Ukrainians to bring infantry reinforcements, reserves to the combat line without almost the losses. So this is the entrance, the exit from this area. The Russians are trying to destroy this tunnel, and if the Russians are able to destroy the tunnel, they will be able to proceed further and to get more buildings and to establish control, the most important, over this industrial area. So the main goal for the Russians is to establish control over this territory, but for now they can't do this, and they're attacking this area every single day with significant number of troopers, and they can use just troopers for now. The Russians attack this territory from many directions, and to capture this territory, the Russians need first of all to destroy the tunnel, this one. Let's add this on map for better understanding, this tunnel. And the Ukrainians can use this tunnel for redeploying of their armored vehicles, let's say from the central part of Avdiivka in this area, and from these positions the Ukrainians can attack the Russian offensive forces. So basically this situation reminds us the situation in Andreevka. If you remember, the Russians was the side who were controlling the tunnel below the railways, and the Russians have possibilities always to to leave the tunnels to attack the Ukrainian forces, and then to step back when the Ukrainians were start bombing this territory with the cluster rounds. For now, the Russians are using just missiles and artillery systems. On this video, we can see how the Russians were trying to destroy the tunnel, the core, the base of the tunnel, with Lemur missile, but obviously if the Russians want to ruin this tunnel, they need to use at least FAB 500 or maybe FAB 1500. So without destroying the tunnel, the Russians have no chances, or maybe have, but with the very heavy losses, to establish control over this industrial area. And this is the main goal for the Russians, at least at this stage of the special military operation, because if the Russians can establish control over this territory and to dig in deeper, they will receive the gates and the road to continue offensive operation, at least in this direction, and or maybe even somewhere else or something like this. And at least this is going to be the first Russian foothold on this territory. So the battle for the northern part of Avdiivka continues, and there are very heavy clashes on this direction. When talking about, we have some updates from Rabotina, but we will keep the updates for evening because we don't have enough of information. Something interesting is happening there, so let's wait before we get more updates. Now we are going to talk about Dnipro River. We got a lot of very interesting updates, and this is the current situation. This is the latest satellite picture of this territory, and as you can see, and you need to pay attention to the Dnipro River itself, original area of Dnipro River. And if we add original area of Dnipro River to the map, you're gonna see that this is the original like Dnipro River that goes right now. That instead of the water reservoir. So this is Dnipro River. This is it. This is the line, as you can see. So what does it mean? That means that this area is about to be ready for the usage. That means that obviously the next summer the Ukrainians will maintain the gray zone and they will try to establish control over the Dnipro, the ex-Dnipro water reservoir, and they will try to capture this territory and to get as close as possible to the Russian positions. They will try to dig in deeper. It will be very difficult, obviously, but we see that Ukrainians shown a very good results in among the islands, and the quality of the surface among the islands is almost the same as the quality of the surface in this area. And as soon as the Ukrainians are able to do this, then they will try to start offensive operation against the Russian positions in Energodar and all these cities, if the Ukrainians are able to hold and control situation before the summer. Obviously the Russians will try not to allow, they will try to collapse the Ukrainians before the summer, but probably this is the plans. And when talking about NATO, obviously this is also part of NATO interests in this region. When talking about Kherson direction, we also got a few updates, and first of all, the Russians published another video of Lancet strike in the vicinity of Tyagynka. The Russians managed to discover 2 Ukrainian tanks, and as a result of Lancet strike, those 2 tanks were destroyed. So we see that Tyagynka area is the main Ukrainian base, is the core of Ukrainian offensive operation on the Russian bank of the river. This territory is under complete Russian control, and this is the situation. So now let's move to the Lancet strike, and that's it. When talking about Krynki itself, there are still Ukrainians, and the Russians brought new type of weapon by the name of Evacuations. This is the propaganda machine, and that's main purpose is to send voice messages to the Ukrainians to surrender, not to die, not to fight for Zelensky and so on. So this is another type of psychology propaganda machine that the Russians try to use to destroy completely the bridgehead and the foothold of the Ukrainians in Krynki. And that's it for this short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, share my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.